self-knowing.
All right, man. Welcome to Crrow777 Radio. This is episode 271. Jason Lindgren is with me, and Mark Passio is back with us. We're going to talk in hour one about some ideas about anarchy. And by the way, this is another one of those terms that you've been led to associate it with all these things that it did not initially stand for. And Mark will correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think people can get an idea by doing the etymology on a word like government. Ment is always mind. So you're basically controlling the mind with the idea of government. Shows how far we've got away from the meaning of words. But anyhow, hour two, we're going to get into the tenets of Satanism. I was going to say pillars, but there's more than two. Anyhow, welcome, Jason.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm awesome. How are you?
Good. You got anything, or should we just do this thing?
No, I did speak with the nice lady who I'm working on the film with, and we're making tentative plans to go do some more shooting, but I don't really have any details yet, so more to follow.
All right. So the film you're shooting is with medical professionals that are saying something other than the mainstream, if people can follow along. Actually, we've both been asked to do narration on that, so we'll see where that goes. Anything else?
No, let's go for it.
All right. Welcome, Mark.
Crow, Jason, thank you for having me back. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I should have said welcome back. So I'm not going to drop the ball this time, or Rose will ride me for the next 3 weeks. Why don't you let folks know where they can find you online right out of the gate?
Sure. My main website is whatonearthishappening.com. That's my site, and there's a ton of information up there in the form of audio, video, podcast series with over 236 episodes. And I always recommend people to check out the podcast in order, starting at number one, and a whole new worldview could open up for you if you go through all that material.
And Mark, let's talk about the ARC for a moment, too.
Sure, yeah. The ARC drive is a hard drive. It's a 2 terabyte hard drive. It started out with a friend of mine years ago asking me to put some of the best information, research information that I had downloaded. I've been downloading information since back in really the early 90s, like at the very beginning of the internet. And a friend of mine noticed that I had a huge digital archive of material that I had downloaded. And he knew that I was very knowledgeable about what was taking place in the world, and he wanted to, learn about it. And he said, instead of me just asking you questions, why don't you put some of the research data that you've amassed, since you've been online, onto a hard drive for me? This is when terabyte hard drives were like $700-800. And he picked one up and he said, would you be willing to fill this up? And I had been archiving information on DVDs. So it was like bags full of DVDs, literally like those disc bags, And I'm like, this is going to be a huge project, but yeah, I'll do it for you. So I took out all my DVDs and was like putting them into my DVD burner and deciding, well, is this worth putting on the drive? Is this some of the best stuff that I have? And I did that, went through all my discs until I filled up that 1 terabyte hard drive for my friend. And that became what I called the ARC, the ARK, Amazing Repository of Knowledge. And decided I'm going to make that available for whoever wants it. And if they write to me, I'll basically have them send me a drive. I'll put the data on it and send it back to them. That's what the ARC drive offer started out as. And then I added another terabyte to it. And now it's a 2 terabyte information offer. So people can check that out at whatonearthishappening.com/ARC, or just click the ARC tab or button on the site, and you can get shipping information. Now, I try to keep the shipping pretty stringent because it's like I have a lot of these coming in and I have to basically keep a flow going. So there's some rigid shipping instructions, but if you follow those, it shouldn't be too difficult, and you'll be able to get that 2 terabytes of research data.
All right, cool. That's a hell of an offer. So there it is, folks. You know where to get Mark. We'll talk about that again at the end of this episode. Jason, don't let me forget. I don't know, should we quote the construct, Johnny Rotten, before we jump in here? He wants to be anarchy, but this is my point. What anarchy means and the way it's been presented in the popular consciousness. Look at the Sex Pistols. I think at the end of that song a bunch of times he says destroy and things like this. It's the negative connotation being put on these ideas. Clearly the Sex Pistols is wholly a construct. As a matter of fact, their whole genre is provably a construct. Punk rock. And I was hook, line, and sinker into that. I was in a punk rock band, by the way. But where do you want to jump in here with anarchy, Mark?
Well, I think that's a great place to start is with the etymology of the word. A lot of times people don't realize that the words that we speak in the English language have origins in ancient languages like Latin and Greek. Anarchy is no different. I would say it's estimated that probably around between 60 and 70% of the words that we speak in English have origins in Latin and Greek. So anarchy comes from the ancient Greek roots. It's a prefix an, a or an in Greek, if it's added onto a word, means the absence of or without, not present. And then the root word is the noun archos, archon. And that means master or ruler in the specific connotation that it does not mean like the master of an art or the master of a skill. The connotation of master or ruler that they're talking about is the master over a slave or a ruler over a subject. So an archon is an authority figure that owns another being, owns a person. Okay, so the master of a slave. So if you put those two root words together, an, archos, and archon, you get without a ruler, without a master, the absence of a ruler, the absence of a master. And that is all the word anarchy has ever meant, means now, and ever will mean. The connotation that people take the meaning of the word in today is a falsely derived definition to mean lawlessness, disorder, chaos. These are the things, these are the images that are conjured up when one says the word anarchy. If you played a word association game with people on the street and you said, give me the first word that comes to your mind, anarchy, go. And you just put a percentage together of how many people are going to say chaos or lawlessness or disorder, it's going to amount to about 99% of human beings probably that will give you that false definition, because that definition has been hammered into people's minds by the social engineers of our world, when in fact all it ever has meant is the absence of a ruler, no rulers, no masters, the absence of a master-slave relationship, or in other words, freedom. Anarchy literally means the state of not being in slavery. That is literally what it means, not having a master or a ruler. Now, if you tell people, give me a word association, one word, and I'd say to you, no masters, no rulers, most people are going to say that means freedom. But that is exactly what the word anarchy means. Anarchy means without rulers. It does not mean without rules. It does not mean without order. It does not mean that there is total lawlessness and chaos, because there are always rules under natural law. Rules cannot be removed under natural law because they are inherent to creation. The rules or laws of morality can never be withdrawn from creation. They can never be taken out of effect in the universe because they are natural, inherent, universal, spiritual laws that have been put into effect by the creator of the universe and can never be taken out of effect or affected at all by anything that humankind or any three-dimensional beings in this universe can do. It is an impossibility to take those rules or laws out of effect. So anarchy definitely doesn't mean no rules. It means no rulers, no masters, or in other words, a state of freedom where there is the absence of a master-slave relationship.
So this has a strong corollary with the law series we've been doing, and I'll just draw the line real quick. So the idea in most of law, and people get so fed up with legal ideas, there's a difference between legal ideas, law and legal, but the legal ideas have been put in place, which underscores what Mark just said, because without violating universal law, other human beings cannot do things to you or force you to do things, which is how we get all these constructs. There's a piece of paper with your name on it. Is this you? Oh, it is. Okay. We're going to do all these things to this piece of paper, and we're going to make you responsible for the piece of paper. There's the basic workaround. And so what we're learning in the idea of anarchy and in the idea of law is, do people need to be ruled? Do they need to be fooled? Or can people rule themselves? I mean, do you see the corollary there, Mark?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I just make the distinction that I feel that all of the laws of man are basically unnecessary and not morally legitimate, because if a man-made law or construct is in harmony with natural law, meaning that it is moral, that it is in keeping with universal moral principles, then it's a redundancy. It's like saying that on a cloudless day, the sky refracts blue light to the human eye, and putting that down as some kind of a law is a redundancy. It's just true. It's just what is. But if a man-made law or construct is in opposition to natural law or the universal laws of morality, then it can never be actually binding upon anyone. That's why all of man's law is fraudulent. All of man's law is the idea that man can somehow usurp the place of the creator and be the lawmaker. All of man's law is based in moral relativism, because it's all about the whims of the legislator at any given time or geographical location. It can change with respect to time and location, as with laws of prohibition or with laws of any given jurisdiction. I mean, you even look at the word jurisdiction, which is the basis of man's law. If you break that down into its etymological roots, that's very interesting, because that comes from the Latin language, jus juris in Latin. Again, there's no really a J in classical Latin. It would be ius. That means a right. Jus juris means right, and then or law, and then dicto dictere in Latin, the second part of jurisdiction, means to say or to speak. So literally, it means to say what the law is, or to say what people's rights are, to speak it. That is the definition of what a dictator does, the one who speaks something into existence. So literally, jurisdiction means to say what the law is, to take it upon yourself to speak into existence what rights are, to arbitrate what rights are, not to discover them, not to apply the trivium method and discover what right and wrong actually are objectively. Again, a right is a behavior that does not initiate harm to another sentient being, while wrongdoings are behaviors which do initiate harm to other sentient beings. Dictating the law has nothing to do with the discovery of right and wrong objectively. It means that a legislator in any given area is saying, I'm basically God, and I'm going to say what right and wrong are. I'm going to say what the law is. I'm going to say what your rights are and what your rights are not. And if you don't go along with that construct that I've laid out, then I'm going to do violence to you directly, or I'm going to threaten you with violence if you don't comply, and or have a henchman or a group of people that are willing to do violence do that to you if you don't comply with my decrees. That is all the laws of man ever have been. That's all they are now, and that's all they ever will be. They are threats of violence. They are not in any way any type of voluntary aspects, and they're backed by violence. That's all it is. And that's why I throw all of man's law out by saying there really is no such thing as legitimacy in the authority of any human beings over any other human beings. There is only natural law. The big part of my work is making that delineation or distinction between what is actually inherent to creation itself, what actually exists in nature, versus what are simply constructs of the human mind that are believed in by most people.
You know, it's interesting. Your definition of jurisdiction there shows the synthetic nature of what men and women do compared to what nature does. It flies in the face of the opening words of the book of John, which I take as a maxim of basically natural law. You know, in the beginning was the word. People are familiar with it, but to get back to the popular culture and how the way we think is controlled, go back to Anarchy in the UK, that song made famous by the Sex Pistols. In the opening words, if I'm not mistaken, it might be a little further in, he says, I am an anarchist. And then he says, I am the Antichrist. And basically what Mark's laying down is, you know, for people who followed on with the law episodes, we can show the King James Version 1611, that's the foundations for law in our world. But it goes to show you what men have done who seek more power using the very thing that encodes the natural, the provably correct way of things. I mean, what would you say there, Mark?
I think that's definitely correct. And I always liken it to the biblical allegory of Eden, where the creator is basically expressly forbidding the alleged eating of the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. And people don't understand that allegory. They don't understand what that means. It does not mean that the creator is forbidding to know good and evil. The word to eat of the tree, to eat of that fruit, okay, is a mistranslation in the original Hebrew. It doesn't mean to consume and actually by eating something like we would eat a piece of food. It's an allegory that means to take into oneself or to arbitrate. That's what the concept of to eat means. Instead of to eat, look at it as to consume, meaning to take into oneself or take upon oneself, or to arbitrate what the difference between right and wrong is. Instead of discovering it, okay, to eat of that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, it doesn't mean just to know what the difference between good and evil is. It means to say that you have become the arbitrator of the difference between good and evil, that you are not just a discoverer as anyone can become, because there is a truth regarding the objective difference between right and wrong. That is our task as human beings, is to literally discover what the objective difference between right behavior and wrong behavior is, and then willfully choose through our free will the right over the wrong. But that is not what people are doing. They are eating of that tree, quote unquote, by arbitrating what good and quote evil are, by arbitrating the difference between right and wrong for themselves. That is saying, I will make up and decide for myself what right and wrong are. I will arbitrate that. I will make that distinction according to my own whims and preferences, not what is inherent to nature, not what is in accordance with the laws of morality of creation. And that is what moral relativism is. And most people in the world are moral relativists today. That's why the world has become so completely evil, really. That's why most people are not good people. They are supporting violence. They are condoning violence. They are doing violence. They are doing theft. All the forms of wrongdoing can be broken down into forms of theft. There's really only one wrongdoing. Anything that anybody does that is a wrongdoing or a violation of someone else's rights is a form of theft, because you can violate life, rights, property, well-being, security. These are all forms of theft. Murder, the theft of life without right. Assault, the theft of physical well-being without right. Rape, the theft of free will sexual association without right. Trespass, the theft of security without right. Simple theft is the theft of property without right. And you can go on and on. The whole idea is there is no wrongdoing that anyone can possibly commit that is not a form of theft in some form or fashion. So there's really only one overarching spiritual law: don't steal. Don't take that which does not belong to you. And that's what understanding the difference between right and wrong is all about. Every single right that exists is a property right, and every single form of wrong that exists is a form of the violation of someone else's property right by taking something that doesn't belong to you. So I've often expressed the whole allegory of Eden as, of really the whole planet Earth, is that this is a huge prison for thieves. We are here to learn not to steal. That is literally what the Earth is. It's like this huge spiritual prison for people to try to understand the difference between right and wrong by understanding what is their property, what do they actually own inherently in nature. And yes, there is such a thing as actual property. It's what we've acquired rightfully, we are using, and we are responsible for, and we maintain. And no one has the right to take from us, like our life, like our rights, like our freedom, and the physical property that we are employing. Every single form of wrongdoing, again, is a form of theft. And this entire construct that we call the Earth, this entire domain, this entire plane of consciousness and existence is really a school and what we have turned into a self-imposed prison, to learn the difference between right and wrong, and learn what is our property and what is not, and to learn not to steal. And essentially, since we have failed so miserably at that task as an entire species, that we have turned this planet, through our own ignorance and our own ego and our own lack of employing the right decisions of our free will, into a prison that is basically a prison for thieves, for people that cannot understand what their right to own is and what they do not have a right to take from someone else through an act of theft.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. And what comes to mind when you say it is when you look at the basic tenets of common law, or preceding that, which what I guess I would call natural law, there's 2 or 3 basic tenets, right? But look what we do. There are so many so-called laws or statutes on the books. There's not a human being alive that could possibly know all of them, and particularly like here in the United States. And every year there's going to be thousands and thousands more added. It's beyond the pale, because I don't remember the 3 tenets verbatim that are around common law, but basically it's about no harm. You haven't harmed someone, no issue. You haven't caused them loss, no issue. Do you remember what they are, Mark?
No, not specifically the 3 of common law, but natural law I could sum up in a basic 7, which are the true 7 deadly sins. Do not commit murder, assault, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, or willfully lying, bearing false witness. Those are the 7 true deadly sins. The 7 deadly sins are not pride, gluttony, sloth, lust, anger, jealousy, and greed. Those are vices. Those things do not actually initiate harm against another being. They are personal vices, which are not crimes. They are not actual forms of theft, of taking something away from another being. That's what needs to happen for a violation of property to have taken place, a violation of rights to have taken place. The real 7 deadly sins, which are the proscriptions, the things not to do that would violate natural law, are murder, assault, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, and willfully lying or bearing false witness. And you could sum all of those wrongdoings up in one basic law of 3 words. And if you use a contraction, 2 words: don't steal. Do not steal. Don't steal. That's the only law there is in all of creation, that if we violate, we take negative karmic consequence down unto ourselves and our entire species by extension. And people can't get that simple law. They can't understand that simple, basic premise, that simple, basic rule of morality. And they will fight to the death to not understand it. They will want to remain in ego and create self-inflicted suffering for themselves because they don't have true self-respect. They don't know the truth, and they don't have any they're in a deep state of self-loathing. And if we continue to apply biblical allegory to this, the whole concept of the Christ figure is natural law. It's all about, that's the way, the truth, the life. That's what will bring order. That's what will bring freedom. And when Jesus in the New Testament, the Christ figure, was asked what his prescription for human freedom was by his disciples, he didn't say start a religion. He didn't say worship me. He didn't say worship anything. The answer of how do we set ourselves free from all the oppression, from all of the tyranny that human beings have been undergoing since they've been on this planet, was know the truth. That was the only prescription for freedom that was given by the Christ figure of the New Testament. Know the truth. And by extension, the truth will set us free. And people still cannot understand that allegorical significance, that what was being said is know the truth about natural law, know the truth about the difference between right and wrong, and then choose what is true over what is false, choose what is right over what is wrong. That is what that's what the exercise of conscience is. Conscience is the knowledge of the difference between right and wrong, and the exercise of conscience is the free will choosing of right over wrong. And we are, as a species, humanity is nowhere near either of those things.
Damn, dude, the scope and breadth of your reach is truly impressive. As you were talking about that passage from Scripture, it brought to mind the other one where the rich guy comes up, says, Lord, how do I find the kingdom of heaven? It's basically, to summarize, says it's simple. Just give away everything you own and come with me. He walks away crying, right, in that right. Parable, because he knows that he can't do it. But Jason, you guitar-toting anarchist, do you want to get in on this?
Well, there seems to be a conceptual anarchy movement going on right now, and it has been for quite a few years. Do you want to address that for anyone, Mark, who doesn't actually know or understand what that might be about and what they're actually trying to get to, or perhaps even get back to would be a better way of saying it?
Well, I would assume that you're referring to what I would just call pure anarchists, or people who are not falling for this hyphenated anarchy nonsense. People who just want people to understand that anarchy means a state of freedom, a state of the absence of the concept of authority being believed in or exercised. And this is an achievable state because it is logically provable. It is objectively and logically provable that no human being actually possesses authority over any other human being. Do we have the right to violate other people's rights? Do we have the right to take their property without right? Do we have the right to commit physical violence upon them without right? Does somebody have the right to say the fruit of your labor belongs to me in whole or in part? No, no individual has those rights. Those are all forms of theft. Those are all wrongdoings. Those are all initiations of violence against our fellow beings. So no individual has those rights. That is logically and objectively provable and true. So how, by extension, if a human being does not have the right to do those behaviors, could any human being or any group of human beings come together and say, we're going to grant or delegate these, quote, rights, which are not rights, they're actually wrongdoings, to someone else and say we're going to, quote, allow them to do those behaviors? That negates the whole concept of authority and government right there. If individuals don't have the right to do something against their fellow beings, they cannot come together and grant that, quote unquote, right, which is not a right, to any other group of people, and then magically call it a right and say that this oligarchical group of beings called government now possess these non-existent rights. This is the whole philosophical idea of what anarchy really is and means. No one can invent rights. No one can create rights that don't exist. No one can magically turn wrongdoings into rights. Our rights can never be actually stripped of us by any other beings because there are inherent birthrights of creation. Because a right is an actual action that takes place in the inherent natural universe, in the natural domain, in the natural world. It is an action that does not violate the rights of others because it does not initiate harm against others. That action takes place in nature. It takes place in the physical domain. It is not a construct of man. Actions are behaviors that take place in nature. And that is why the concept of rights is not something, it's not actually, I shouldn't even use the word concept. Rights are behaviors. And no one has the right to say that you cannot exercise behaviors that don't initiate harm against others. This is the whole philosophical idea, of what real anarchy means. And any anarchist that is actually trying to get the word out about what real anarchy is understanding these philosophical ideas, and they are trying to teach them to other people, to help people to understand what natural law actually is, what rights actually are, and that the idea of authority is inherently morally illegitimate because the concept of carrying out authority must by definition be based in violence, because authority is claiming that you have rights over someone else and they must obey the decrees that you put out. That is what authority literally is. It's saying that I'm the lawmaker, I have jurisdiction over you, I have authority over you, and you must do what I say. You have some type of a moral obligation to obey my decrees as the master because you're my subject, my servant, my slave. And that's always inherently morally wrong, and it's always inherently morally illegitimate. And that's what I consider the real anarchist movement. The true anarchist or voluntarist movement, as some people call it, is simply teaching those principles, the principles of non-aggression. No one has the right to initiate harm or fraud against their fellow human beings. And then we're combining that with the self-defense principle. If your rights are violated, if someone is in the process of taking away your rights, your life, your property without right, then you have the right to defend yourself through physical force, up to and including deadly force if necessary, if they don't stop committing the act of aggression. So we do not have the right to commit aggression, which is the initiation of violence against our fellow beings, and we have the right to defend ourselves against aggression through physical force. Those are the two principles of what I would call the true anarchist movement.
So I don't want to lead us too far off, but after you and I spoke last time, I thought, damn, I should have brought this up with Mark. And now as I'm trying to get it back in my head, I can't remember the two other kinds of wood, but I don't know anyone better who might be able to shed a little more light on what I'm about to ask you. So I think the first pope that I'm aware of, called Alexander, which is everyone else knows as Borgia, who was probably Jewish, by the way, was certainly Spanish, or a Catalan, as they like to call him. They made a big deal out of claiming he was buried in a lead coffin. But I later was reading that a lot of popes get buried in two types of wood. And I can't recall. I think it's cypress, something else, and then lead. So there's like these three caskets they're putting these dudes in. Just to bring everyone up to speed, everyone knows lead is associated with Saturn. Recently, someone who was doing the gold thing said quite often gold is found in the vicinity or needs to be separated from lead when it's mined. But do you have any insight on that? And I know it seems like a sidestep, but in a way, I think it relates. Do you have any clue, or even do you remember what the other two woods are? Why are they burying those dudes like that?
I do not, but I would assume that it is some type of an alchemical formula or ritual, because wood was always kind of the idea of the spirit. Earth, air, water, fire, spirit, and spirit was often associated with wood. That is why the biblical figure of Christ in the New Testament was considered a carpenter, a worker with wood, a worker with spirit, or the fifth element of the five elements. Wood is something that is also ignitable into the fire of spirit, the fire of right action. So there's a kindling aspect to it to bring forth fire. It also comes from the earth. Trees grow from the earth. Their branches reach to the air. So it's a mixture of all of the other elements as well. They need to be watered. And that's the emotional aspect. The air is the intellectual or mental aspect. And of course, the fire is the will. So the wood contains all of that. It contains references to all of that, again, coming from trees. So I would imagine that allegory that you're referring to in that burial is probably some type of an alchemical ritual or an alchemical reference.
Yeah, we should both take a closer look at it, because I know there's something to it. And the other thing I would mention is the outer casket. I think there's two inner wooden. I think one of them is cypress. I can't believe I forgot the woods, because I just got a hold of this, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, and I was all over it. But as everyone knows, what does lead do? It blocks all kinds of light. Like when you go in for even an x-ray, those people are wearing lead shields, right? So there's this whole thing to it. But
and that's the opposite. Exactly. Lead blocks light. It's heavy.
Cold.
And that's the idea of transforming that base metal into spirit, into higher level consciousness. That's what the whole process of alchemy was all about in the alchemical tradition.
All right. So I didn't want to pull us too far off, but as you were speaking, I remembered that I forgot to bring that up the first time. If we do this again, we should both keep that in mind. Maybe we can come back on it, because there's an interesting tale there, because I found out that subsequent popes, apparently a lot of them are buried that way, or that was a claim in one of the places I read. So let's pull it back around to anarchy. Jason, were you done with your idea?
Yeah, I wanted to get that out there because a lot of people just don't understand what the actual concept of anarchy is supposed to be. And I see a lot of posts on social media and things like that going on and on and on about it. And I don't know if people necessarily understand what they're really talking about.
Well, one of the things that I like to do with people who have a difficult time with the concept of anarchy is just ask them if they think that kingship was ever morally legitimate. In other words, when there was one ruler who claimed that he had the divine right to rule everybody else, he's the representative of God on the earth, and other people must obey his decrees or he'll send his henchmen to kill them, to cut their heads off, okay? Was that ever a moral thing? Was there ever such thing as a moral king? Even if you believe in this concept, this ridiculous notion of benevolent kingship, benevolent rulership, right? What is rulership by definition? It's someone saying, I will make the determination about how you must live. And if you don't obey me, then I am going to do harm to you. is there anything moral in that? Can that ever be moral, right? The whole idea that someone is claiming authority over someone else, let's just remove the euphemism, right? This is what people need to do. They need to stop thinking only in terms of the euphemistic terms that they've been given to describe an actual situation in nature, right? That isn't kingship. That isn't rulership. Do you know what it really is? It's called slavery. That's all that ever was. That's all it is now. That's all it ever will be. It's called slavery when someone makes the claim over the life of another and says, you will live as I tell you to live, or I'll commit harm to you if you don't comply. That is making a claim on the life of another being. So there was never a benevolent king. There was never a benevolent rulership. There was never a moral right to do that thing, because that is slavery. Can slavery ever be moral? Well, the answer is no. There is no such thing as moral slavery. No one can put someone in a state of slavery and say, I'm doing a moral thing. No, you're doing a violent thing, and that's an immoral thing. And that's all kingship ever was. It is slavery. So the whole concept of authority, we really even shouldn't euphemize and call it, I'm claiming authority over you. No, you're claiming that you're my owner, and that means you're claiming that I'm your slave. Okay. And if you say it like that to somebody, they'll say, oh, well, I'm not anybody's legitimate slave, but you yet claim that someone has the legitimate authority over you. It's just a euphemized word for the same condition. That's all it is. And you think authority means something benevolent, but what it really is someone claiming you're their slave. So that's the state of slavery. We have to stop euphemizing it. So all the modern form of this condition was, the ancient form of it is the pharaoh ruling people, the warrior king ruling people, the king, okay, or high-level priest class. It doesn't make a difference what form of authority. It was vested in basically one person, okay? Maybe at sometimes maybe a couple of people calling themselves a royal family or royal dynasty, okay? So you had kingship vested in one. And now you have government vested in a few people. Comparatively, if you look at the ratio of the number of people that are actually government officials, okay, or actually writing legislation and then enforcing it, it's an oligarchical few. So all that has changed from the ancient world to the modern is the concept of authority has been taken from being vested in one person, the king, the queen, etc., and it has been diffused. It has been diffused throughout an oligarchical few people by comparison, and they call themselves government. And that is the new slavery. And that's all it is. And we need to stop euphemizing it and calling it what it actually is. All forms of authority are slavery. As a form of authority, government qualifies. Government is slavery. It always has been, it is now, and it always will be nothing but slavery. And that is an immoral condition, and condoning it is immoral. See, it's like, not just the people who do it are the ones who are immoral. All the people who ever condoned slavery throughout the history of humanity were bad people. They are immoral people. They are immoral souls. And to continue to condone it once you understand what it is means that you're a bad person if you continue to do that. That's the whole idea that people have to understand. Anybody saying that anybody is someone's legitimate slave or anybody is anyone's legitimate authority is immoral. They are an immoral being, because they are claiming that it is okay for that person or that group to commit violence against peaceful people who only want voluntary interaction with other people. And every claim of authority is a claim of ownership and is slavery. And anyone who condones that is condoning slavery, and therefore they are condoning the violence that backs up that slavery, and that makes them, by extension, also immoral people.
This is pulling me right back to where I set out to try to show a more reasonable way that I think is more probable how Rome fell than the story we're handed had to do with the families from the temple and so on. But during the course of that research, I found verbatim that the upper crust families, I don't like the word, the elite families of Roman society owned something like 98% of all arable land.
Yep.
So to put this into context for people, does a human being have the right to forage for food? Well, under those constructs, no. They have the rights, but they're being prevented They're being infringed because it's like, who's ever heard the story from England when people got caught poaching in the king's forest where he liked to go hunt? You know, what happened to those people? Some of them put to death. But to go all the way back to the fall of Rome, you're looking at a situation where some authority is claiming ownership of basically all the arable land. Arable meaning land that can be used, grown on, these types of ideas. In other words, everyone becomes a tenant of some sort, and everyone is basically asking permission to get their water, to forage for food, to hunt for food, all these kinds of ideas. So you can see how far this goes back. But I'll add another thing to what Mark just said. It's probably a lot more obvious in whatever time that might actually have been. I don't know the distance between then and now, or if the descriptions are as accurate as we'd like them to be. What I do know is that as we've come forward, every effort has been made to shadow out, to pull under the umbrella, to obscure the clear vision of what I just explained. Suppose tomorrow you were granted, that's a bad word. Suppose tomorrow you figured out a way to deal with the legal system and claim complete freedom. You're subject to nothing and no one ever again. And for the sake of this little idea we're expressing, no one's going to mess with you. All right. You're just going to walk away clean. Where do you go? Where can you find the mountaintop that someone's not claiming ownership of the land? Do you see? And so that begins to really point out the provable nature of what Mark just laid down. Because even if we were able to extract ourselves from all these kind of foul systems that everyone's getting fed up with, where do you go at this point? And that kind of demonstrates just how much everything needs to change.
The system of oppression, the system of authority, the system of rulership, the system of government that you just explained, there is a name for. It's called feudalism. It means that the master owns all the land and the subjects are merely people who are allowed to live upon it and perhaps work it if the master gives his consent and gives his decree that it may be so. And that's what we have today. No one owns their property. No one actually really truly owns their homes because they're paying property taxes. If you really legitimately own your computer, okay, can I claim that you must pay me a tax every year or I'll strip it from you? No, because if that's the case, then it's really my property and I'm just allowing you to hold it for as long as you continue to pay me the extortion that I demand. And that's all property is in the modern day. If property is taxed, it isn't property. If anything is taxed, really, it isn't property. Okay, because taxation is theft. Taxation is a decree of saying you will pay me this extortion fee or I will do bodily harm to you. That's all it is. Income tax. We don't own the fruit of our labor. That's proof that we're living in feudalism and slavery. Property taxes are proof that we're living in feudalism and slavery. But people can't see it because they've euphemized these terms. It's not property tax. It's feudalism and slavery. It's somebody saying that you may not stay in that property without paying me something, or I will come and do violence unto you. And people don't see it like that. They don't see it like that. They give a million excuses. Oh, well, you're living in this township or area and schools are built there. Well, that has nothing to do with the price of tea in China. It's a complete non sequitur. One has nothing to do with another. Okay. So what if services are offered in an area? Just like people say, well, you signed this contract or that contract. If anybody signs some piece of paper, that is not somebody's right to go and commit violence unto them. Okay, you could try to seek some type of compromise or remedy, but it's like just because they are tricking people into believing that there's some legal fiction doesn't grant them the right to do violence unto somebody just because somebody agreed. It's like if somebody says that they'll take part in a game that is being conducted at a carnival, like a shell game, it doesn't mean that they have the right to be defrauded. It's like the carny or the con man doesn't have the right to defraud somebody with a rigged game that they voluntarily choose to take part in if the game is rigged. It makes it illegitimate. People can claim that authority all they want, but there will never be a legitimate right to it. And it's the same thing when it comes to taxation. It's the same thing when it comes to property tax. These are just claims that people believe in and believe are somehow morally legitimate when they are not, when they are all based in violence. And this is the fundamental recognition that people have to realize. We are living in a total immoral capacity against all of the laws of creation, or the laws of God, if you want to call it that. I'm perfectly comfortable with that term. Some people are not. You can call it whatever you want. The laws of karma, the laws of morality, the laws of cause and effect, the laws of consequentialism, the laws of God. Okay? It's all the same thing. It's the moral laws of creation, the moral laws of the universe, that if we live in harmony with and we live in accordance with, there will be order, there will be peace, there will be prosperity, there will be freedom. And the more we go against them as a society in the aggregate, the more we're going into disorder, enslavement, chaos, total bondage. It's an inescapable law of creation. I refer to this natural law aspect as the law of freedom. As morality increases in the aggregate, freedom increases in the aggregate. As morality decreases in the aggregate and we become collectively more immoral through our choices, our behaviors, and what we condone, we become collectively more and more enslaved. So all you have to do to understand how that law is in effect is look at the result. Look at what we are receiving as a society, as a species. Are we going more toward freedom, or are we going more toward enslavement? I think a 3-year-old with brain trouble, with physical brain damage, could probably figure it out in a couple of seconds without the aid of a slide rule. Okay, to be a little bit sarcastic. All right, that is how easy it is to understand the direction the human society and the human species is headed. We are going down the cosmic toilet. We are going into total abject bondage and slavery. And there's a reason for that, because we will not learn the laws of morality and abide by them. We want to usurp the place of the creator of the universe and say that somehow we can make up what right and wrong are. And all we will ever do with that position is bring more harm, suffering, death, chaos, and slavery down upon ourselves.
Well, to put a way to think about this, because people get tied up in terms. Suppose a person invented a new way to light a room and then claimed they invented light. They didn't invent light. Light's here. Light will always be here. Light is what it is. And so in a way, the proof that you can go out and know that light is here is one of the immutable things put into the way this place functions. So when men and women come along and make a flashlight or a light bulb and claim they've done something, it's a bit ironic. And as a matter of fact, if you go back in the old enough definitions, the first light bulbs, there were referenced to them as being false light, which I like that definition. But Mark, what you're saying, I'm with you all the way. But I would add, I think this is the burnout phase. I don't know what period of time we begin to lift, but I suspect after this, it's like the idea of a house. Got to have a true foundation. Everything we've seen built recently has no true foundation.
That's right.
Therefore, it can't stand. And so in the case of 2020, we can observably see that outright deceit, lies, and dark-heartedness have become the driving force that leverages off fear to try to get to an end. This is unsustainable, but what it shows is exactly what Mark's getting at. It's like a corporation, right? At first, a corporation starts up like Google, and they have this clever little motto, don't be evil. Well, by the time the year 2000 gets here, the venture capitalists are saying, you people had better turn a profit this year or you're done. And all of a sudden, don't be evil gets thrown out the window, and actually be evil becomes the operating plan. But they got to hide these ideas. So some dude stands up in 99 and says, guess what? There's no more privacy. And no one believes him, but he's telling the truth. But now everyone believes him. You see the slip that's gone on over this time. But what's more is the people who have at least an eye to see with, or half an ear to hear with, understand that everything that has driven the 2020 narrative is a falsehood. And it's worse than a falsehood because it attacks the very spiritual nature of what it means to be a living man or a woman, to cover your spirit. It's a bit like saying, I got this special water and I'm going to snuff every divine spark I can come to. But Mark, we've got about 10 minutes left in the hour. So I don't want to forget this. Tell people where they can find you again. Let's close with a couple ideas.
Sure. Yeah, my main website is whatonearthishappening.com. And the concept of the site was conceived, I guess, back in around 2005, where I wanted to put out what I felt was really going on this planet and give the philosophy that I had learned regarding the objective difference between right and wrong behavior to help people to understand that natural law is in effect and that we are here to learn and grow in consciousness and to learn the difference between right and wrong. And the website doesn't have a question mark at the end because it's not intended to be a question. It's a statement. What on earth is happening? And this is my explanation of that. And it's a stepwise progression. It's an initiation, I would call it, because the site is actually, if you go through the podcast, organized in a way that takes people through a very specific stepwise progression to awaken them out of unconsciousness and help them to understand what's really going on within them and around them. It's an examination of self, and it's an examination of human society, culture, and the human species. So again, always recommend people go to the podcast page. I call that Starting the Journey to True Spiritual Awakening, and listen in order from number one at your own pace. Do not skip. Do not skip around. Just start from number one and proceed to number 2 and 3 and 4, and just keep going at whatever pace it takes for you to get through them. And again, if you do it like that, an entire worldview paradigm shift will happen in your mind if you bear through it and go through all that material. And people will go, oh, well, some of this is old. No, all of the philosophy stands. It's eternal. Okay. There are old events, but the events that I talk about and announcements that I go through are actually important reminders of what people were doing and what we are still doing. Okay. It's like, it's a highlighting of what I call the great work, the one great work to end human slavery. And people complain sometimes about, well, some of these podcasts, it's not all just your content. It's not all just the material about the philosophy. No, I highlight what people are doing. I talk to people. I interview people as well. And I think that's important content in it as well. And I would recommend to people to go through that as well. You know, if you want to skip some event announcements, fine, whatever. But the whole idea is power through something. Most people can't even do that anymore in the world. They don't know how to exert and exercise their will. I see people give up when things aren't easy all the time, whether it comes to technology or understanding something or getting something done in the physical world. A lot of people look at a task and go, well, is that going to take more than a few minutes of my time? And the answer is, yeah, it is. It's going to take many hours, many, many, many hours of your time, right? But see, the thing is there's only really two spiritual currencies. There's time and there's attention. And that's why we say spending time and paying attention, right? If you spend the time to go through this podcast and you pay attention to it and you really look at the things that are discussed in it, and you go through even some of the ancillary materials that I present with each podcast, you will get a payment at the end. It will not be something that you do just for free. There will be an exchange, okay? You will receive something for your investment of time and attention. And that will be light. That will be knowledge. That will be hopefully wisdom if you take action upon that knowledge. And you will definitely go through a paradigm shifting experience. I can guarantee that if you take the time to go through that podcast. So that's where the main body of my work is at, whatonearthishappening.com.
I'll add a couple things, and then I'll ask you a question before we close up. I remember in the old, black and white movies, the grifters are always looking for a rube.
Yes.
Well, this is what knowledge will excuse you from being the rube, the easy mark, the child that looks like an adult, the person that's easy to fool, which has been most of us up into the recent decades. For my part, a lot of it came down to common sense, but I'm going to state what I think is probably correct. And the reason I think it's not probably correct, I accept it. And the reason I accept it is because I understood that when these kind of systemic things men and women create, these perversions of nature, they get so complex, there's no easy way to get your mind around them. And some years ago, I realized, no, this is simple. You just use a natural tenet from natural law to measure what they're warping. And so what I realized was that what's gone on here is a smokescreen in the year 2020. And what we all think is the problem is actually covering up all these other things that are going on, that this is unsustainable and that they, like some of us, know we're entering a new era. And I like to sum that era up as this possible explanation. The one we're leaving, was based in I believe things. The one we're entering is going to be based in I know things. And in this, there's really no way to hold down the human divine spark. And I always make the joke from Sound of Music, how do you keep a wave upon the sand? I always say, how do you solve a problem like Maria? Just because I'm using the wordplay, someone could joke me back and say, well, you don't do anything with Maria. You jump in her and you swim, right? Because it's the allegory for the ocean or the water or the wet ideas. But what's your take? Is this sustainable? We can't just lackadaisically go back to sleep here. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I am suggesting is we're at the end of an era, and what we see going on here is going to crash and burn hard at some point. What's your take?
We are inexorably and inevitably screaming into total chaos and disintegration, screamingly fast, rushing toward it. And that's the only way that I could put it. And there's a reason for that things are going to break down into total chaos. They already are in chaos. They're going to break down into massive suffering and death. And I don't say those terms lightly or to be an alarmist. We are going to see suffering the likes of which we haven't ever seen on this planet. And there's one reason for that. The inability of the human being to say three simple words, I was wrong. And that is the nature of being entrenched in deep ego. And I don't mean ego in the sense that when I pick up a glass, I raise it to my mouth instead of someone else's. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the out of control ego, that sense of identity that we cannot let go of, the story that we tell ourselves about who we are, and then we get invested in that, right? That's what I'm talking about as the ego, that people cannot let go of. They cannot let go of who they say that they are and see past that to see that they are a consciousness. They cannot understand that. They're too aspiritual to even understand that concept of letting go of a false identity and understanding who you are really deep down underneath. That's why so few people can't make the distinction about what the world has become as slavery. They don't even understand that they're enslaved and everyone else is. And that's why most people aren't doing the great work. They're not trying to reach people with this philosophy. They don't even understand that the world as it is today is a problem. They're actually fine with it. People are basically fine to just go along with this system of tyranny and enslavement as long as they have their bellies full and have a roof over their head, because that's all they care about. Most people will go along with the tyranny if they're given enough money and resources to just go along with it or to carry it out. They'll do even immoral behaviors for any amount of money. That's the kind of immorality that we've been steeped in the world. And there's only one result that you can receive from creation. It's a law. It's like saying, well, if I take my clothes and I put them here in this hamper or this basket, and then I pour a bunch of acid all over them, is there going to be some kind of negative repercussion to the clothes if I pour strong acid that will dissolve fabric all over clothes? Yeah, it's a law. It's a chemical reaction that's in the nature of reality, that it's going to work like that. Okay. You're not going to stop that if you do that behavior. If you put your hand over a hot stove, it's going to burn the flesh. Okay. If you walk off the top of a large building, you're going to fall and get hurt or die. That's inescapable laws of the mechanics of nature. Well, there's inescapable laws of behaviorism. It's no different. It's the same thing. It's a law in the natural universe that is inescapable. It's immutable. It cannot be changed, and we cannot escape the result. We can only choose how we're going to behave. So we can elevate our consciousness and understand how that law works, and then we can get a different result by aligning our behavior to how something actually works, by not walking off the edge of the cliff, by not putting our hand in the stove, by not throwing caustic acid all over something that we don't want to destroy. But the problem is human beings are in a satanic mindset. They are in a mindset that says, no, I will not admit that I have been wrong, because essentially I want to usurp the place of creation and claim that I am God, that I'm the arbiter of truth, that I'm the arbiter of right and wrong. And only death, suffering, chaos, and bondage can ever result from that satanic mindset. It will only get you slavery and death. That's all it can create. But yet that is where we are as a species almost entirely. I would say 99.5% of the public and I might be conservative in that estimate, is in that satanic mindset.
All right. Well, that does cue us up for the second hour because we're going to get into the tenets of Satanism, which really started to come to the fore under kind of underground way in the music of the 60s and the 70s. And as time went on, it started to be more openly embraced. And then it started to be morphed into appear to be something that it's not. I agree with Mark. We're going through the disillusionment right here. But in my view, at some point, we're going to pull up. And I don't know whether that's within my lifetime or the next folk behind me, whether they're going to put up with Hellbent. And I think there's every possibility for Hellbent. If, for example, everyone lines up and says, yeah, sure, whatever's in that hypodermic needle, go ahead and put it in me. I think if we go down that road, yeah, there's going to be a lot of culling. At the end of the day, I think we're going to be okay, but change ain't easy. And the degree to which we're going to go through this breaking of eggs for the new omelet, it remains to be seen, whatever that might be. But I do know there are a lot of people that maybe even a couple years ago didn't have a clue. They're starting to pick up on things. But that does bring first hour of 271. If you're hearing this, you're going to be on the website. But hour 2 will run on Crrow777radio.com, Crrow777radio.com. You can be a member at any level and log in for the full episode. And again, we're going to pick up on the tenets of Satanism. I don't think the hour 1's going to run on YouTube just because I don't want to contend with their nonsense. But there it is, man. Join us on the other side. Cheers. All right, man. Welcome back to Crrow777 Radio. This is hour 2 of episode 271. Jason Lindgren is back and Mark Passio. Offline, we were talking basically about if you were going to boil down the idea of what Satanism is to its most basic way you could express it, from my point of view, that word would be selfishness. You know, these ideas were unacceptable to a generation not too long ago, and they came into the counterculture in the 60s and the 70s. People like Aleister Crowley, who didn't offer a damn valuable thing to our world. From my point of view, it is complete self-centeredness at the expense of others. And by the way, he ripped off everything he was about from other traditions that had been long-standing and then warped them to a selfish end, as far as I can tell. But these things started getting into the music. Think of the idea of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That is exalting your animal passions. It's what it is. I grew up in that generation. And people who weren't participating in these kind of cool mindsets, there was something wrong with those people. They were square. And that set the stage for a generation. Now, when we come up all the way to where we've come, Satanism is not couched anymore. People can't recognize it because they're not calling it by name. But by the same token, it's not hidden. And we lost a recording for a minute, and I was mentioning a thing about movies as we get in here. You will notice that entertainment, if you break down that word, the thing that seeks to go in and hold your mind, always remember, when you see the word meant, you're talking about mind. That's a good place for people to start. But those things in entertainment that will reach the most minds on television years ago would have been Big Bang, number one. Couple years ago, biggest thing in the movies was the Marvel Universe. These are the things that have a very programming edge to the mind of a man or a woman. At the same time, they're foreshadowing. Like in Marvel, they were showing right before it happened all the empty streets, right? Couched in, oh, half the world disappeared, and they're going over a stadium. No one's there. It's almost normalizing this thing that's about to happen. You go back to the other side of the coin, which is the B movies. Now, the B movies are always openly showing intent, but they're couched in kind of a comedic, let's get stoned and get mindless entertainment thing. Idiocracy is a good example, which in my view is a reach. Some warped mind out there would actually like to see us get to a point where the smartest man in the world is basically an idiot. But anyhow, welcome, Jason.
Good afternoon.
All right. Do we got anything, or are we going to jump right into the devil's doorstep?
Let's get Mark back in here. And Mark, please give out your contact info right here at the top.
Sure. My main website, whatonearthishappening.com. Whatonearthishappening.com is where you want to check out all of the info that I've put out over the years.
All right. So the truth of this world, Mark, if you agree with me, if you don't, then say so, is we're all connected. We are all connected in this system. You know, in every religious tradition, you will find versions of this. One that comes to mind that I've used a lot is the Buddha one, where the Buddha's watching a guy plow a field. He uncovers a worm, a bird comes down, eats the worm, and it dawns on him, man, we're all connected here. Everything we do sends out ripples into this big world of ours, and we are all tied together. Now, if that is true and provable, which I accept that it is, I don't know what Mark might accept, then the idea of Satanism is screw everyone else and everything else. It's whatever I can get for myself. And by the way, if I can do this to feel good right now, then I'm all in, and be damned with any concern for anything else. What do you make of all that?
Well, it's absolutely true. And I do highly agree that the fundamental nature of our reality as human beings is that we are inextricably interconnected to each other, to nature, and to consciousness as a whole. And that can never really truly inherently exist in a state of disconnection. However, the mind, when it goes awry, when it actually embraces things that are false, when it doesn't care for truth, it enters this state of perceiving everything in a state of separateness and separation. And that is what I'm calling the ego that is fractured, the ego that is broken, the ego that is out of control. The ego in and of itself is not the nature of the problem. It's not that we have a sense of self-identity as an individual or as a monad of consciousness, a unit of consciousness in the great whole, is not the problem that we see ourselves as a distinct individual. That enables us to have a sense of uniqueness. That enables us to have a unique sense of identity and a unique expression in consciousness. That's not the problem. The problem is when we come upon the ego that is hardened into a sense of identity such that we are attached to things that don't serve who we really truly are. We are attached to things that are going to lead us down a path of pure separation, pure selfishness, and ultimately pure slavery and bondage and self-inflicted suffering. And that's the path that humanity is on and has been on for countless generations, for tens of thousands of years. And what this ideology has been termed by people who have actually embraced this sickness. They have actually embraced an illness and a sickness of the mind and the soul and called it an ideology that they are proud to embody, that they are bold and brazen in the embodiment thereof. People have referred to it in the modern day as Satanism. Now, Satanism is not, first of all, what Hollywood wants to portray it as. It is not the literal worship of the Christian devil. I am not saying that some Satanists don't believe in certain entities or venerate them or conduct rituals with their names, etc., because it does occur in certain practices or branches of Satanism. But in general, as an ideology, as a worldwide network and a worldwide belief system and religion, it is a religion, not in the sense of what most people think of as religion. It is a way of being in the world, is what we have to understand. It's an ideological way of being and acting in the world. It's a way of seeing oneself in relationship to others in a complete state of selfishness and separation. So Satanism is not a bunch of teenagers dressing in black robes, going out into the forest and sacrificing animals in the name of a Christian anti-God figure called Satan. This is not what the modern ideology or even the ancient ideology of Satanism is. This is a Christian notion of what Satanism is. And I mean that from a perspective of churchianity, okay? This is a church-inspired and church-propagated notion of what Satanism is, because the powers that be behind the religious organized religious institutions do not want people to understand what Satanism truly really is and be on guard against it and be very vigilant about what it is really doing in our world. They want people to remain ignorant of what this actual ideology that really drives the rulers of the world, that drives the psychopathic lunatics that actually do hold the reins of power in this world. This is their ideology. This is their state of mind. This is their agenda. This is their playbook. It's their rule book and playbook. And if people are disempowered by not understanding that mindset, it makes it all that easier for these psychopathic so-called and would-be masters to control everybody else. It's a piece of cake if you don't know your opponent's mindset for that opponent to get one over on you. And that's what they want. They don't want us understanding what their actual belief system and mindset is. So that's Satanism in a nutshell. I called it, when you asked me what in the pre-little meeting that we had before we went on live, you asked me what I would say Satanism is in the simplest verbiage that I could come up with. And I said, Satanism is the apotheosis of out-of-control ego. It is the apotheosis of selfishness. That means the elevation to godhood of pure selfishness of the being. Okay, you are putting the ego that is completely warped and out of control and only concerned about itself up on a pedestal as the god of your own religion. That is what Satanism really is. It's not I want to be clear about this because a lot of people will immediately disagree because they have their notions of what it is. And I want to explain this very detailedly, and I want to be explicit about this. This is not what I believe Satanism to be. This is what it actually is in the real world, because I was formerly involved in an official capacity as clergy in this religion, in an aspect of the religion that is officially recognized by the United States government and our military institutions, the armed services, as a recognized religion that people can become ordained clergy within. And I was made ordained clergy, a member of the priesthood of the religion of Satanism in the 1990s. So I held the rank of priest in an organization called the Church of Satan. If you want to know about the Catholic religion, you would go to a Catholic priest and ask them about their tenets and beliefs. If you wanted to learn about Judaism, you would go to a rabbi. If you wanted to learn about Islam, you would go to an imam. These are the people who are the clergy of the religion. I was clergy in the religion of Satanism in my past, in my youth. So therefore, I know a thing or two about what the actual tenets and belief systems of this worldwide religion actually are. So for people to disagree with what I'm saying about it, I would just come out and say, whoever disagrees with what I'm about to lay out about what the ideology of Satanism actually is and the tenets that it actually professes and believes in, if people say, I disagree and I don't think that's what it is, it's utterly ridiculous. They're just completely, purely wrong and do not know what they are talking about. And it actually has to be said to them like that because their ego is in the way, because they falsely believe something, that believe that they understand something that they do not believe. And it's something I've butted heads with people, often brutally and in a very antagonistic fashion in many cases, where people are telling a former priest in a religion, you know nothing about the religion that you are actually a priest in. And I know more about it watching nothing but nonsense BS Hollywood movies portraying garbage about it that isn't even true about what the beliefs and practices are. That's my background, or what my priest told me, who also knows nothing about it. That's what I have to say about what I believe it is when you are actually a practicing, involved, active clergy member of this organized, officially recognized religion. And people are telling me they know more about it than I do.
Well, let me give the example to back up what you just said. Within, what did I just tell you about the Marvel Universe? Big damn deal. So many minds going to be pulled into that. Guardians of the Galaxy 2, there's a celestial. He's the god above all others. What's his name? Ego.
Very appropriate.
Right? They're encoding these ideas. But what I'm going to do here is there are two quotes that I handpicked to put in the movie Shoot the Moon that Jason and I put together. These quotes are from an older time, whatever that may be, but they understood the creation. What they accepted to be godly, correct, provable was all derived from the old natural sciences. And here's the first one. Both of these quotes are from Omar Khayyam, and I'll get your reaction, Mark. The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on, nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure back or cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. Now, from my point of view, truer words have never been spoken, which is why I included them in a movie that represents the work I did. These things are based in what I consider to be the creation, which run by the rules that are immutable, as Mark pointed out in hour one. And I'll give you the second quote right here. And it pertains very closely to what we're talking about. This again from Omar Khayyam, the Rubaiyat, both of these quotes. I sent my soul through the invisible, some letter of the afterlife to spell. And by my soul returned to me and answered, I myself am heaven and hell.
Both great quotes. Awesome.
Yeah.
The first one is...
Let's point one thing out so people don't get lost. You've got to realize that later alchemy came along, which may have even been prevalent when Omar Khayyam was doing this. But these are based in natural sciences. So when I send my soul, we're not talking about spirit, right? Spirit could be like, you could think of it as the breath of a human being. The soul is the divine, immutable, unseeable you. I don't know how else to do it, but there, Mark, just so people understand. I sent my soul, not my spirit, not my body. I think that's critical for people to understand.
This is actually the first I heard either of those. I'm actually sad to say I'm not that familiar with his poetry. I'd like to actually get into it somewhat, because those are the first times I'm hearing those, and they're pretty brilliant.
To me, the average person hears them and they recognize deep inside there's something to them. But Jason, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I just want to be very clear when Mark is talking about Satanism. Are you specifically referring to the Church of Satan that was founded in 1966 by Anton LaVey?
No, that is a small aspect of the worldwide religion called Satanism that contains a network of worldwide adherents in every country, in every ostensible culture, background, religion, every race, every age, both sexes. It spans the gamut of human civilization. It is entrenched in just about every culture on earth. There's adherents in every town, city, nation, you name it. And there's more of people who believe in this religion and live it and live its tenets than anybody would be comfortable realizing. It is all around us.
How would one get selected to start being brought into the fold of this religion?
Well, there's, first of all, bloodline members who were ancient clergy and ancient adherents to this. And then there are people who they tap. They are already in control of all of the worldwide institutions. I've played many times for people in my presentations and radio shows, TV shows, online shows, an interview by a former Satanist like myself, Nicholas Schreck, who was asked in an interview on a cable access TV interview that he did back in the 1980s, what would the world look like if Satanists were in control of it? And this guy just didn't care. Like he was like brazen and open. He basically said it just out in the open to people. He said to the interviewer, his exact words were, "You misunderstand. We already are in control of the world." That is how he answered the question by the interviewer. He said, "You quite misunderstand. It's not what would the world look like if we were in control. We already are in control of the world. It's a matter of how much more tightly we want to control it." And that is exactly what the case is and what is happening.
There's another example that I can offer here. Does everyone remember when old Elon Musk launched his fake car into space? And we quickly demonstrated that, I think it's 1984, I don't know, I'm guessing at the year. There was a movie called Heavy Metal,
81,
which was animated. 81, Heavy Metal, had all the animators from around the world and the popular music of the time, or a lot of it. That image of that car supposedly fakely being launched into space was a verbatim match to Heavy Metal. Now, what's that movie about? That movie is about an evil that's everywhere, in every galaxy, every planet, everything. and constantly seeking to take over. But I don't know if you agree with me. I'll say the quote since you're not familiar with it one more time.
Mhm.
But in my view, the first quote that I gave you is the one thing that people who are doing the Satan thing never want you to understand is true. Okay, here it is. The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on, nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. Then it goes, there's a little bit after that goes on to say, nor will I, ever write a word that fades in light. This I must be certain. Goes on to say a few other things. But
that first one is about natural law. That is about the creator writing the laws of the universe, and nothing that mankind can ever do will ever possibly wipe it out. Those laws are set in stone, and there is nothing that we can do about it. We can either use our free will to learn how they work and align our behavior to them so that we do not create self-inflicted suffering, or we can ignore them and in our ignorance create a prison for ourselves.
We want to act like the good things we've done in life are the big milestones. But what this points out is when we blow it big, that's just as big a mile. We do anything, it's done. There is no, it's like that old tenet that we covered. The only real moment that exists is now, the second. And it's already gone by in the time I've tried to explain it. The past is gone. The future doesn't exist yet. So we have this moment, and everything we do in each moment is permanently recorded. In other words, you could almost take this Omar Khayyam quote and say, each thing done is a pebble into the water. Is anything going to stop those ripples? No, those ripples are going to happen, which is why I pointed all this out. But what do you think about the allegory to heavy metal? Are you familiar with it?
I am not, no.
So basically we have Elon, there's the whole movie is based on evil, and they literally reenact to the world to convince them that they're doing this thing. The opening sequence from this movie, which is about evil making its way. And actually it's a re-echo of things like The Last Jedi. Why is there only one, all the time there's one godly, for lack of righteous person left to fight off all this evil, which is the same thing in that movie. There's only one left, a girl who's whatever they were, they flew on things. They had a little tattoo on their neck to identify them as the righteous bloodline. But in every instance, in this kind of satanically edging world, people are trying, who have long been edging it to get everyone to think selfishly. They always portray that the righteous are damn near gone. There's only one left. And by the way,
almost sounds like you ever see the old 80s film, The Last Starfighter? That's kind of similar to that one. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and it represents that we have to take a stand against evil as an individual. That it always is just us against the rest of these forces of darkness arrayed against us. And it's a very small percentage. We could almost look at all the people that do understand true right as almost one soul, one consciousness, and taking a stand against all of the massive amount of evil that is in our world. The people that do understand natural law, God's law, the Creator's law, that accept that and embrace it and want to live by it, versus the throngs of completely immoral souls arrayed against us that are just these mindless hordes that just want to live a total selfish pleasure pursuit of life and take absolutely nothing seriously, even though they're bringing total devastation, raining it down upon themselves and everyone else. They don't even care about the harm that they're doing to themselves, let alone to anybody else. That is what the ego eventually does. It eats itself. It consumes itself. People are so immoral that they are actually destroying themselves as a result, and they're rejoicing in it as they do it. That's how depraved this world has become.
The ego has been described as the other by some of the modern originators of how to hack the mind, like Freud and Jung. That's one aspect of it.
Well, certainly not human, because any force that claims to be human would not be trying to destroy everything that is human. And that is what this force is doing.
It's a key point to consider, but consider this. So you could almost say that each of us has been tricked into the kind of satanic mindset by the simple act of war. So let's take the first Gulf War. Most people's mindset is, oh, we're going to war, we're going to kick their butts. Oh, look, our media is embedded with our military. And the mindset there being, well, it's happening to them, it's not happening to me, right? And you could run that back through almost anything where you're looking at horrendous things supposedly being done to another group of living men and women and being okay with it, basically.
As long as it's not me, that's
right.
it. That's
There
what
it is.
Satanism is. That's part
There
of
it
what
is.
Satanism is.
And this
So-
echoes back to the Eastern ideas, which is why I always harp on them, the concern or compassion for all living things, because that goes in the other direction.
That's right. As long as one is suffering, all are suffering.
Right.
That's an Eastern and a Western mystery tradition concept of what it means to be truly enlightened, is to know that as long as there's any suffering taking place around you, the self is suffering, because we are all inextricably connected as one consciousness.
And therein the kind of vow of the bodhisattva. I'm so advanced I could be reborn into nirvana or heaven or whatever you want to call it, but I'm taking a vow that I will be born back into this hellhole until all people
are
escape.
out of suffering. That's right. That's right.
And it's almost, when you logically look at it, it looks like an impossibility, right? But I don't know. I would imagine that
as you said earlier, it's a change of mind in the present moment. That's why the present moment is a gift. It's a present. Literally, it's a pun on words. We can make that shift in consciousness in an instant if we realize the true nature of principles and philosophical truth. All it is an admission that we were wrong about what we previously believed and took upon ourselves as our identity. It was a falsehood. It was built on something that wasn't true, that wasn't based in truth and principle, and it led us to do and to think the wrong way, and then as a result to behave the wrong way. And there's no shame in saying that, oh, I got that wrong, but you know what there is shame in doing? Continuously doing it even though you know it's wrong. That's
denying.
what real shame is. Yeah.
John, you're spot on. You're so
Pure
spot
ignorance.
on.
Right.
You know, Jason and I made a rule for this show because I knew that I would get it wrong. It's every time I get it wrong big, back to the mic. I blew it, man. And
Right.
that is my own attempt to self-police myself from drifting to what you just pointed out, which, you know, when I look back over my life, I was a Marine during the first Gulf War. And that was really my big wake-up call, because I was like everyone else. But then as I had to go through it, and I realized what was being said, and I realized what was actually visibly going on, my eyes were opened. It was perversion at a level that has no name. And then you start to think, well, my God, who would ever be behind this? Who would ever be wanting what I see here? And that's when I began to realize that truly, in a way, there's invaders here. It's almost like there's people that are of the earth, naturally part and parcel of the development of this place we call Earth. And then there's this other thing. And what's weird about it is the ego starts to speak to it. It's the other. It's a good way to think about it. And people can go look this up. Do you know, Mark, if is it Freud or Jung? Sounds like it might be Jung, referring to the ego as the other.
I'm going to say that that's Jung, but I could be incorrect. But
yeah, I could be too.
Yeah, you'd have to check into it, but that sounds like something that Carl Jung would ascribe.
Right. He got heavy into more kind of off the tracks ideas, and he started paying attention to what native cultures were doing, and to some degree hallucinogenic drugs and other things. But these guys are the basis for the work Jason and I did on Tavistock or the Frankfurt School. It was basically what they were putting forward, was used to hack the mind. And then, of course, it didn't take long before Jason and I were drawing the lines that these guys were in and around the circles of royalty. Of course, Jung being the protege, which we were told fell out with Freud. But it goes on and on and on in this system. And I am convinced, I don't know about you, Mark, that there was a time when we were way more godly and righteous, and that kind of history was wiped away. And it has to be so, because we can still see the vestiges of truth. We can see it in the Omar Khayyam quotes I just read. We can see it in the vow of a bodhisattva. We can even still see it in the early vestiges of Christianity. But most of that's
I
been
could
wiped
see
away.
that earlier in my lifetime. Just the general population was just generally more moral than it is now. We're in rapid descent and decline for one overarching reason. People are only focused on their own gain. They're only concerned with their own comfort, and they can't admit that they're wrong. They can't see that. That's really what the ego is, even more so than just pure selfishness. It's the inability to acknowledge that one is wrong. The inability to say the words, I was wrong. wrong. And again, there's no shame in doing that as long as you're willing to correct your behavior and then do what is right. The problem is most people aren't willing to do that. All you have to do is ask. The first tenet of Satanism is egotism. It's pure selfishness. It's believing that you're the only one that matters. Screw everybody else, pretty much, in so many words. It's, I'm going to get over on everybody else no matter what I have to do, even if it includes harming them, taking their rights away, taking their property away. Doesn't matter because I'm more important than them. I'm God and they're just a piece of scum, and I'll do whatever I can to get over on somebody. How many people just think that? I mean, how many people just walk down the street looking for something to steal? This is rampant just in my neighborhood, which isn't even a super downtrodden neighborhood. You couldn't leave one thing not bolted down or it's stolen in an instant. The second you walk, you leave one piece of personal property unattended for 5 seconds in this city, it disappears instantly like someone else just owned it. I can't even imagine walking down the street and looking at maybe a package on someone's doorstep and thinking, yeah, I'm just going to take it. I don't care whose that is. That's mine. I mean, imagine this. But yet this is a huge portion of people. And I'm not saying this to just be down on humanity and just discourage people from trying to think that there's any hope. That's not the case, folks. It really is like that in most major cities throughout this whole country. And I would argue throughout most of the world. Most people just think about themselves. Most people in the world. And I don't think anybody can really argue what I'm about to say. If you're honest with yourself, do you think most people in this world wake up and do you think that they consider what they could do to help the world situation? Or do you think they wake up and from the minute their eyes open, when they wake up out of bed, the first thing they're thinking is, what can I do for me and my own gain until the moment they go to sleep at night? If you compare those two things, how many people are looking to serve what is true, what is right, what is good, and what will help the whole world, right? Or do you think most people, when from the minute they open their eyes in the morning, they're only focused on what they want for themselves until the minute they go to bed?
This is reflected in the quality of the things that we use to exist in a country like this. If you go back to the 50s, things were built that would last generationally. As a matter of fact, the waffle iron that my mom and dad got at their wedding still functions. The high quality of things, that the workmanship, it's so detailed because it's the underlying truth of what Mark's saying. There was pride. And
it's so a reflection of the love of self, of true love of self, because then you would take some pride in your work, and there's nothing wrong with that.
The work's going to others. So
That's
the
right.
pride that you're putting in is the quality that you're handing off. In
Helping
other words,
quality of life improve. Yes.
I would go so far as to say is that the first time the door really gets kicked on hard to take these things that were never out in the open or culturally would have been accepted out in the open. We're talking about a time when on television, a man and a wife are not even pictured in the same bed. That's right. The moral status. And then here comes sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And by the way, what's the first big run at rock is Buddy Holly. Well, who's he with? The Crickets, right? Then who's the next big run? The Beatles. All these insects with their 6 legs are coming. But my point is,
I mean, that level of depravity has gone all the way down to things like exploiting children,
right.
Depicting them in sexual situations, like in that Cuties thing.
Oh God, that was disgusting.
I don't know what that is.
Whatever you want to call it.
It was a documentary-ish that Netflix actually got a lot of heat for, and it sexualized, what were they, Mark, like 11, 12-year-olds, something like that? I certainly didn't watch it.
In some cases, even younger, I think.
Yeah, it's absolutely foul. They're trying to normalize depravity.
Yeah. It's an open push, and this is what came. When I think back now, Mark, on what the grandparents must have endured in the early 60s, can you imagine? Can you imagine what they endured coming from the era? I mean, they were even called the greatest generation, which is a bit of a cultural construct. But my point is, the moral level that has fallen within my lifetime, those people were at the vanguard. They had to watch their children and grandchildren go off the damn rails. Yeah. And so as we all stand here now looking around saying what's all wrong with it, it's almost like it was on steroids for the first time at that point. I mean,
that's right. The whole idea is once you have that level of total egotism, total selfishness, only focused on one's own gain, not admitting that you're wrong, you could put all those as that's the overarching first tenet of this religion is I'm God, other people don't matter, I only live to serve myself. I only live to pursue pleasure pursuits, and he who dies with the most toys wins. That's the first mental tenet or ideology of the religion called Satanism. Now, where would it go from there? Now, first of all, you have to first imagine, just think and be honest with yourself. Are more people in the world of a mindset like that than are not? And I would say if you're being honest with yourself, if anybody listening is actually being honest with themselves, all you have to do is look around you. And are most people selfish? Do most people really only give a damn about themselves? Do most people think about themselves, their own comfort, their own pleasure from the minute they wake up till the minute they go to bed? And if you're being honest with yourself, you have to admit that that is true for the majority, the vast majority of people. What would that mindset invariably lead to next? Well, if one thinks that they're essentially God, there's no higher power. Most of this entails atheism, the belief that there's nothing beyond oneself, that you die and that's it, you turn to dust, that there's no real consciousness, it's all just electrochemical interactions in the brain. This is an extension of the worldview of Darwinism. It's the extension of the worldview of Newtonian materialism and the primacy of matter and the rejection of anything spiritual. These people are largely aspiritual. They have no spirituality or spiritual connection in their lives, and they don't want one, and they don't care, and they don't think that that's a problem. They think they take pride in that. Okay. And they're completely selfish and they're only focused on their own gain. What would a person who is basically looking at themselves as the highest power in creation invariably think of next? The first thing that would come to mind in a person's mindset like that is right and wrong are ultimately meaningless, because after all, who gives a damn about anybody else? If I'm the most important person and nobody else really matters, then right and wrong are what I say they are. Right and wrong are personal decisions for me to decide, for me to arbitrate, because it's all about me, 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 me. So if you then take this construct, which is called moral relativism, the notion that there's no objective right and wrong as far as behavior is concerned, and that we can each individually arbitrate for ourselves relatively what right and wrong are. In other words, what's right for me, okay, what I consider right behavior is completely different than what you consider right behavior, or completely different than what the neighbor down the street considers right behavior, or what a person in a foreign country considers right behavior. And never the twain shall meet. It doesn't make a difference what any of those people think, because that's their construct and it's relative. There is no absolute objective standard on what a right is. Okay. And guess what? If you go around and you conduct a social experiment and you ask people, are right and wrong actual truths that can be discovered? What behaviors are right or wrong? Or are they relative and subjective? And do people basically decide for themselves what right and wrong are? I'm going to tell you the exact percentage. 2 out of 3 people. If you do this with a wide enough audience, if you do this with a wide enough sample set of people, okay, you're going to find that it will round off of repeating 6, and that's not an accident. Okay, you will get 0.66666 out of 1, okay, as a ratio. 2 out of 3, 2/3. That's what 2/3 is as a decimal. 2 divided by 3 is repeating 6. Point repeating 6. Okay, that is the actual ratio of how many people in the world, and I'm being very conservative, are morally relativistic. And I've done this social experiment. We've gone out and actually interviewed hundreds of people and asked them, is there an objective standard of right and wrong, or is right and wrong a relative construct of mind? No matter how many people we've done this with, it's always been 2/3 of people believe it's relative, and about 1 in 3 believe that right and wrong are objective. Now, that number is actually increasing toward moral relativism. I think it's now probably about 3/4 in the world in some places. Certainly, probably in major cities, it's even larger than that. And that means we are heading deeper and deeper into the second satanic tenet. The second tenet of Satanism, right behind pure egotism, is moral relativism. No such thing as objective right and wrong. It's whatever we arbitrate it to be. That is the eating or the consumption or the taking into oneself of the knowledge of good and evil. That's what that biblical allegory actually means. It is a reference to moral relativism, to arbitrate for oneself according to one's own whims and preferences the difference between right and wrong, instead of actually learning, actually discovering, according to natural law, the laws of the creator of the universe, what the actual objective difference between right and wrong behavior really is.
Well, this forces us back to what Omar Khayyam forces us to look at, that we do provably exist within the creation. We call it nature. So how does the satanic movement do what the Pope did? Pope started calling people pagans and making them enemy of the state to begin to do the separation from nature. How does Satanism deal with that? Because there is no lie in nature, and that separation must occur, right? To start to get this mindset, we start to have to get grocery stores to make sure no one's growing their own food, these types of ideas. So I'll ask point blank.
Yeah, it does this through man's law. That is the mechanism that Satanism operates by. That is why it is necessary for this ancient religion to control all government and to centralize government further and further into fewer decision-making bodies so that it can centralize global power and then rule the world with one iron fist. The mechanism by which it does that is the satanic laws of man. All the laws of man are satanic constructs because they're all based in moral relativism and violence. So they are, by definition, satanic. That is Satan's tool, is government. Government is the tool of the concept of Satan as the adversary or the opposer or the other, the force that tears humanity apart and creates chaos, disorder, destruction, death, and slavery. That is the mechanism by which it operates.
It's crazy. We could go in so many directions. You know, I once saw a documentary, very low budget documentary done on this tiny little Buddhist outpost out in the hills. And once a year, they had to go down to the city that they, was most of a day's trek to get there. And so difficult to get back up into the hills where they were, mountains actually, completely cut off from everybody once you're up there. But there was this whole segment about the abbot, the chief monk, deciding who was going to have to go expose themselves to the city. And they go into this whole thing exposing that once, even the guys who end up going, and they did bring one of the most elevated of the younger apprentices, or whatever they were properly called, the younger monks that were not as advanced. They carefully chose, thinking that the least damage would be done to this individual with these older monks. And they went down in the city, they film it, they get the things that they had to get from a city to exist another year up there. And the guy launches into this whole thing saying, it'll take me the better part of a month to undo the damage that I exposed myself to for having to go down to the city for a day. It's crazy. Yeah. And the first time I saw it, I was thinking, really? And then the more I looked at it, I began to realize, and there's a catch-22, isn't there? Back if you go to the really old ideas of these dudes in meditation, separated from the world, doing what they do for the benefit of all living things, someone would always take it upon themselves for the merit they would accumulate to go make sure those dudes were fed. Well, we're long beyond those years. So now these guys are out in the middle of nowhere, and there are a few things they just can't do by themselves in the mountains. So they're forced to come back into the city. But it's insane when you see it broken down so literally in this way. And this man looking you dead in the eye saying, it's going to take me a month to cleanse my soul of a day in the city.
I mean, I think that segues perfectly into the third tenet, because knowing that they want to basically control and enslave everybody, that's ultimately what the worldwide network of Satanism, not each individual Satanist, okay? We're not talking about that, because there are people who would consider themselves Satanists that don't adhere to what I call the worldwide hierarchical network's agenda. Okay, this is what my case was. I got involved in this not wanting worldwide slavery, but learning that this was the overarching, wider agenda of the religion of Satanism, was to really bring people under one authoritarian control system. And just think about that. What is that a representation of? That is a representation of the usurpation of the Creator's laws, replacing them with the laws of the out of control, egoic master class that considers themselves God. They want to become God on earth. That's what Satanism wants. That's what the out of control ego wants. It wants to be God. It wants to say, I am the arbiter of truth. I am the arbiter of right and wrong. Okay. And ultimately, what does that mean? I can do whatever I want, including suspend people's rights, grant rights that don't exist, take people's property when I want, tax them and call that some kind of a good for society when it's in fact theft under duress and violence. Okay. And ultimately what they want is a world of masters and slaves. Well, what is that hierarchy known as? That is called social Darwinism. The idea that we should extend the survival of the most ruthless in the animal kingdom into the human domain. See, natural law doesn't apply to the animal kingdom. This is one thing that people have to deeply understand. Animals are not held to the moral standards that human beings are because we are beyond an animal. That's why we don't just call ourselves an animal. One of the tenets of Satanism, or not one of the tenets, but one of the main beliefs of it is, I would say it's not the four overarching tenets, which I'm talking about today, but it's an ancillary tenet, is that man is no different than any other animal, right? So that's part of social Darwinism, which is tenet number 3, okay? In this 4-legged table that we're building for the structure to stand upon, this is leg number 3 or tenet number 3, social Darwinism. Man should erect a social structure that mimics the ruthlessness and cutthroatness of the animal kingdom, because mankind is no different than animals. Well, that's untrue. Of course, mankind is different than animals. We have a higher functioning brain. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, should we do the allegory of the scorpion and the frog? I mean, do we hold is a lion a murderer? I mean, these points are easily refuted, but I think the allegory of the frog and the scorpion, people can just look up the story of the frog and the scorpion to get to the crux, but it's a trap. It's a false trap. And again, Omar Khayyam pulls you right back through that nonsense, doesn't he?
Yeah, human beings are not animals, and we are capable of free will choice in the moment, and we are capable of change.
And responsible.
That's it. Pure responsibility. And we are capable of understanding the difference between right and wrong, whereas an animal is not truly capable of cognizing that philosophically. Okay, you can say animals do have a limited range of emotions. They do display emotions. I would say that they absolutely display emotions, but they certainly are not going to be able to reason the way a human being can actually reason and formalize thought and deeply cognize the difference between right and wrong, deeply cognize philosophically. Animals certainly are not capable of things like that. I think no one who's really taking their argument seriously is going to significantly really argue that we're no different than animals. I mean, we are significantly different than animals in just about every way, in what we can create and how we can express ourselves and how we can think and reason, and certainly in the free will choice that we have to express our behavior. So to say that we are equivalent to animals is a cop-out. It's just trying to say we are just a product of our programming. No, it's not just that. We are the product of conditioning. We are not the product of just biological programming, and we're just that way. This idea that human nature is just a certain way. No, human nature becomes a certain way based on how we are conditioned. That's why we call it the human condition. We need to stop thinking in terms of human nature. Do you know what human nature is? Human nature is that we can be conditioned. And then the condition becomes how we were conditioned, how we were programmed. The condition that is experienced in the 3D reality we live in is determined by what was the conditioning or programming that we underwent to program our minds, to condition our minds, because then that's what outputs behavior, and the behavior is what generates the result that we get as karmic consequence or as the manifestation of the reality that we then have to live in. We make our bed and then we must live in it. And that's all behavioral choice through free will.
You know, you could take remember George the Bush Sr., what was it, 91 on 9/11. He gives his New World Order speech.
Right.
This is a prime example. oh, we have a real shot here for a world that's run by laws, not
That's
the
it.
law of the jungle. But you see,
That's right.
he's lying to you because
Yes,
the laws are made by the strongest animals.
that's right. He is saying that he wants man's law to usurp the place of actual natural law.
There it
He's
is.
calling natural law the law of the jungle. That's what he's really referring to, but
Right.
it is not the law of the jungle. That is exactly the opposite of what
Perversion.
natural law is. Yes, people hear the word natural and they think Darwinism. That's really, in explaining natural law, that's where you have to start, is explaining what it is not. It is not the law of the jungle. It is not the survival of the fittest. It is not how animals behave toward each other. Natural law is the eternal, universal, immutable laws of the creator of the universe that govern the consequences of the behaviors that we put in, that beings with the capacity for holistic intelligence put into effect through their behavior. That is what natural law actually is. Therefore, it does not apply to lower species of animals lower than human beings. There's not going to be karmic consequence for a lion taking down a zebra
Right.
on the plains of Africa. But there is going to be karmic consequence for us doing harm to other sentient beings in any form, because we know the difference between right and wrong. We have the capacity to know the difference between right and wrong, is really what it is. The capacity is there, therefore natural law applies. If the capacity for deeply cognizing that and understanding it at a philosophical level is not there, which isn't made possible by the brains of lower animals that are lower than human beings on a scale of consciousness, then they cannot be held to that account. Okay, this is why we don't, if a baby accidentally knocked over a tremendous weight like a refrigerator off of the edge of some precipice and it fell on somebody and killed them, we wouldn't hold a baby accountable for that because they cannot cognize what they just did. But an adult human being could be held accountable for what they did to a person in negligence and resulted in their death. People have to understand that we are held to account according to natural law because we have the ability to understand the repercussions of our behavior toward other beings. That's why we are held to account under karmic law, and the animal kingdom is not.
Well, I think we got about 10 minutes left, but to pull
Okay.
back around to the old 9/11 nonsense of George Bush, it has
Yes.
occurred to me that if you want to talk about the 9/11 construct and you want to know about what's in the middle, you have to say 10, don't you?
There it
And
is.
I think, yeah, I think it's part of the construct, but we're coming around. We're getting closer to the top of the hour, so we should probably lay down with the fourth leg to that stool. And
Yes.
I'm using the alternative meaning of that word. What's the fourth leg to the stool, Mark?
So if you have already declared yourself to be God, you don't really care about anybody else. You only care about your own profit and gain. Okay. You don't believe there's any objective standard of right and wrong behavior, which is moral relativism. You believe that there should be a cutthroat, ruthless hierarchy of human beings, which is social Darwinism, the third tenet, okay? And that we should have a pecking order whereby there's a master class and a slave class. And of course, the Satanists who already see themselves as God will become the gods of this new world order. They will become the master class and everybody else will be their slave class. Well, then what does any true psychopathic ruler always invariably end up doing? What do they want to do with their own population? They want to cull it. They want to determine what characteristics will be in the gene pool of their subjects because they want their subjects easily ruled. They don't want them uppity. They don't want them rebellious. They don't want them intelligent. They don't want them willful, right? So what are we seeing? We're seeing the culling and breeding into the population and gene pool, the characteristics that the master class wants there. We're seeing the culling out of characteristics it doesn't want there, and we're seeing the breeding into it of characteristics that the master class does want there. What is that known as in scientific terms? That is called eugenics. Eugenics is when a class of people decides they are going to take certain undesired aspects or characteristics out of a gene pool by deciding either who can breed and who cannot breed, or killing people. You could do it physically by killing people or forced sterilization, or you could do it through what I call epi-eugenics, by mind controlling people into believing things and then breeding that down to the next generation, to the next generation, the next generation, until you have a class of people where all of the characteristics, like strong willfulness, rebellion, true intelligence, true morality is all bred out of the population like it is today. And you have a population that is much more easy to rule because you've bred dysgenic characteristics into them that only leads to their further enslavement. And that's the case that we have today. That's the fourth pillar of Satanism, and that's what these social engineers, this dark occult priest class that truly does run our world, believes in. They believe in selfishness and egotism. The self is God. Doesn't matter who you have to step on to get your way. There is no objective right and wrong. The world is a social, animalistic pecking order that the master class must rule the roost. And ultimately, we're going to breed the characteristics in that we want, cull the characteristics out that we don't want, and if necessary, cull the population physically. That's Satanism.
They made a recent television show on these very principles and included the idea in the name. That would be the Shark Tank, wouldn't it? There it is.
There it is.
They're the conditioning of what is provably correct thrown out the window, and this perversion elevated, which is what George Bush the Senior was doing back in 1991, maybe in what will be perceived as a more elegant fashion, but it doesn't look too elegant from where I'm sitting.
Instead of a TV show, it sounds more like a description of the planet Earth to me.
There it is. It is actually bringing to bear the four tenets you described. You know, I recently, not recently, it must have been, 4 years ago. People might remember if they watched it. But I saw an excerpt where someone was claiming to have a cure for cancer, but I think it was for pets or something. And they just beat the holy hell out of that guy. It was about a 10-minute segment, I think. And I remember them just coming down. And it was clear that it didn't matter whether it was possible or not possible, but anyone who was going to say those words was going to get it. The sharks were going to start circling. And there it is, the kind of glorification of that which is provably perverse. And yet it runs, 6-7 nights a week, I'm sure, on television. Unreal. But Jason, we're coming down to it. You want to add anything in here?
Well, Mark, there's a secondary term that kind of goes along with Satanism, and that's Luciferianism. Is there a distinction you would like to make with those?
Yeah, I would say that Luciferianism is a bit more complicated to understand than Satanism because it's twofold. There is such a thing as light Luciferianism, and there is such a thing as dark Luciferianism. So this is similar to Masonry, right? Freemasonry, true Freemasonry is a system of morality that's taught and illustrated through symbol and allegory. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with true Freemasonry. If people study it, they would learn a tremendous amount about natural law and morality. And that's what it's seeking to really teach people. Unfortunately, it's been perverted through the lodge system over the years and turned into something that it was absolutely never intended to be in the modern world. And it's rife with corruption and perversion, as every other institution is. And I would call what it has become dark Masonry. It is not Freemasonry anymore. It is not seeking to build a world in freedom based upon natural law. It has become something that is actually blocking the light, blocking the truth from people in many cases, in most cases, I would say, through the lodge system of today. And it is not teaching them natural law, and it is not illustrating that system of morality through its allegorical teachings. They are actually concealing that in most lodges from people and not basically promoting that type of learning. They're not encouraging that type of esoteric learning. So when it comes to something like Luciferianism, we have to understand it's a dual-sided coin. Satanism is pretty much one thing, and it is the tenets I just described. Luciferianism can be looking at, it depends on which aspect of Lucifer we're talking about, because the concept of Lucifer as a light bearer, as one who was the favored of the Creator, that could act as a vehicle to bring the light of the Creator to humanity to awaken it, is one aspect of Lucifer. But then if that knowledge isn't used properly, which in the Christian Apocrypha and allegories referred to the dark element of Lucifer as a fallen angel who had that light of the Creator, but did the wrong things with it, but didn't walk the path truly. Like you were talking about Crowley earlier. You could look at him as a dark Luciferian, one who had the light, but then didn't walk that path. He talked about this spiritual knowledge and understanding, but then his behavior betrayed it. Okay, similar to the biblical Lucifer, or not even biblical, but apocryphal Lucifer, that is this fallen angel that had this light of the creator and knowledge. And what it did was use it against people as a weapon because it wanted control. It was egoically wanting to be in that favored place. It wanted to become God. It didn't want to just be favored by God. It wanted to be that force. It wanted to be that creative energy and force, and it wanted to make the law itself. So the idea of Lucifer as the light bringer, which is what the word means, lux ferre. That's where Lucifer comes from. Lux in Latin means light, and ferre means to bring or to carry. So one who carries or brings the light. Okay, the light is knowledge. It's the knowledge of natural law. It's the knowledge of the creator of the universe. It's the knowledge of the difference between right and wrong behavior. That's the true aspect, the true light aspect of Lucifer. But again, as with any force, there's a counter force. A Christ has an antichrist. God and Satan, good and evil, right? The true sun or the true light has an opposite or an opposer or an adversary, and that's the dark sun. Lucifer as the dark sun, the dark light. Okay, the one who was favored of the creator, but then wanted to become the creator, so it became blackened, soulless, evil, totally entrenched in ego, and wanted to use all that knowledge against people to control them instead of to elevate them to higher levels of consciousness. That's dark Luciferianism. So it is a twofold nature when it comes to Luciferianism. And I would say ultimately the dark Luciferians are really who are controlling the entire planet. That's the priest class that even is above the regular pecking order of Satanists. That's the higher level dark occultists. That's the elite of the elite when it comes to this dark religion, okay? They're not really elitists, they're really psychopaths, but they are the ones who are at the very apex of the pecking order of even that ancient satanic old world religion of pure egotism, selfishness, moral relativism, greed, slavery, eugenics, etc. The dark Luciferians are who are really calling the shots at the top of the food chain in the 3D human realm of this control system.
Everything you just laid about Luciferianism can be tied to the sky clock, and everyone who's paid attention to the sky clock understands the duality. It's just been kind of perversely pushed to one side. But Jason, I think we're there. Last shot. Anything you want to get in?
Well, Mark, is there anything about these concepts that we didn't cover or anything you feel people should know and understand? Because I'll tell you, we've done a lot of work on the decades, and it's obvious that there was massive social engineering going on. The people who were living through the 50s were radically changed by the time you get all the way up to the 80s, where that ego thing that we were talking about was absolutely rampant.
Sure.
And to compare even that to today is just, oh my God, what a difference. But is there anything we should cover that we did not?
I think this is a really good primer on what Satanism really is for people that may have been misled or don't know much about it. And you could just research it and see that what I'm saying is the truth. You can go into their own writings. I recommend reading the Satanic Bible, reading the Satanic Rituals, reading the Devil's Notebook by LaVey, reading the writings of Michael Aquino like the Ruby Tablet of Set, and his other books like Mind War or Psy War or something like that. He has many, many books out. I recommend reading their own writings. I recommend reading the writings of social engineers. I mean, read Tragedy and Hope by Carroll Quigley. He'll tell you about this establishment that he called the Anglo-American establishment or the Society of the Elect. And he agreed with them and he wanted to help them. The only thing he thought was that it shouldn't be concealed. They should come out in the open and perform what in the occult world has been called the externalization of the hierarchy, where the ruling class comes out and says, yes, we're your masters. And if you go against our rule, we will kill you and call the population. He wanted them to do that. That's how much he was in agreement with them and wanted to be on the in club. But there's so much more that could be gone into. I'd recommend people check out my presentation called Demystifying the Occult Part 2, Satanism and the Dark Occult. I break it down pretty extensively in there. I go into my background. That's the other thing people should understand is that from what I saw firsthand, the people who are Satanists are not what Hollywood portrays them to be, and that's not what they look like. Fortune 500 CEOs are Satanists, okay? Bankers are Satanists. Doctors are Satanists. Lawyers are Satanists. People in the military, generals in the military are Satanists. This religion is entrenched in every walk of life, in every culture. It's behind the scenes in every ostensible religion. The world religions, there's Satanists running those. There's Satanists running the medical industry. It's pervasive. And that could sound paranoid to people until you really research what the ideology is and you research how they put their point men in positions of power. Okay, they already have the resources of the world. They're not trying to acquire them. They already have them. They already are in control. That's the paradigm shift that needs to be made. That what lies behind the ostensible corridors of power is Satanism. It's the old religion. It's the dark occult. Once people realize that, that's when the real paradigm shift is going to happen. Not just understanding the political machinations, the financial machinations. We have to understand that who is really running this planet is an occult priest class, a dark occult priest class. If you want to go really deep into that, go to whatonearthishappening.com, go to the podcasts, watch all my videos, and you will understand it. You will come to a much greater understanding of it, I can guarantee you.
So what was it that Ozzy Osbourne's supposed muddled mind offered us? Let's see, what was it? Generals gather in their masses, just like witches at black masses, evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerers of death's construction, or something like that.
He was telling people.
Goes on to say something about in the fields, the bodies burning while the war machine. It goes on and on. But what we're talking about here is well known, by the way, and often in the best writings that I have ever come across to, they refer to these institutions, if that's the right way to talk about it, as the inverse brethren. I think the Light of Egypt has a version, but if you don't bring some knowing to the party, when you do the Light of Egypt, you're going to have a similar problem as when you're reading scripture. The literalism will trap you to the lowest levels of understanding, because the inverse brethren are often associated with the dark satellite, and I accept it all. I think it's one of the most useful descriptions of a thing. But again, without knowing, you get stuck in these literal surface narratives. And for whatever reason, even books like The Light of Egypt, a lot of the old Christian mystics, which I find so much value in some of the old Christian mystic writings, because they were not separated from the natural law. See, I've come to a point now where I realize if I can look at the natural world and I can jive with this, then I can be okay with it. If I can't, then I'm not. It's just what we're saying. If I can go out and understand that a season is coming and I can't change it, and this is the way that we will be surrounded in our life, then I know these are truths. And I know they're truths at a higher level than men or women can pull off or not pull off. If I look at light and I see it reflect off a thing, I know that to be true, and no one can be telling me any different. When I look up, the sky is blue. I cannot be convinced the sky is green. These are the measures that get thrown out the window for the kind of perverse systems we've all been fooled into thinking are just normal. And what's most of it built on? Entertainment and creature comfort. That's me, 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 me. That's ego all day long. But Mark, I'm going to give you one last shot here to tell folks where they can find you.
Absolutely. My main website, whatonearthishappening.com. We're going to have some good things coming toward the end of this year. We're trying to wrap up the Natural Law documentary, which I'm going to be releasing. It's going to be my first full-length feature documentary. And then sometime next year, we'll be launching One Great Work Network. We've basically pushed that back into 2021 because of everything that's been going on and a couple of technological snags that we've hit. But we're going to be moving forward with that. So we'll be launching that coming next year. But all of this information and more can be found at my website, whatonearthishappening.com. And Crrow and Jason, I want to say thank you so much. Great interview. And thank you for the work that you guys put forward.
All right, man. Cheers. I'm going to wrap it up here, Jason. You know, in some of the recent episode images, I've snuck in ideas about the inverse brethren for a couple reasons. For the people who are ready to see things, they'll notice and maybe question it in a way. But there was a time in this world where people knew things based on the rules of creation, which are immutable. They can't be changed by a man or a woman, which is why the lies come, which is why the deception comes, which is why the piece of paper with your name exists to fool you into becoming responsible for a thing that's a fiction. But when we get back around to what's going on here, there may have even been a time when things like alcoholism and drug addiction could more closely be tied to the very influences we just outlined. There are ideas that the inverse brethren and ideas of astral factors are the driving forces behind these things. And I think there's possibilities in all of it. The more that I look into the way this place probably actually works, to the point where I have never existed in my life and understood more clearly that what you accept to be true, correct, and right is the damn most important thing there is, period. Even if you're not all the way correct in your assumption, it doesn't matter. And here's why it doesn't matter. Because had I not done drugs and sex and rock and roll when I was young, I wouldn't have learned the lessons that I learned to bring me along to where I am. In other words, we have to fail. We have to break eggs. We have to do hardship to get to a different place. But right now, those people that are willing to stand up for the things they accept as true and correct, they're going to be the people that add something to where we're going. There it is, man. That's the second hour of episode 271. And we're so close now that I'd like to wish you all a happy, healthy, and higher-minded end to this era. We're literally days away in my view. There it is, man. Cheers.